My name is Elena Sokova. I'm the Executive Director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you here in the audience and those joining us virtually to a seminar, webinar, or both hybrid event, which we jointly are organizing with the European Leadership Network. I know that the topic of artificial intelligence and its various potential impacts and interplay with nuclear issues, both risk but also applications and others, is very much in the focus of many discussions and debate nowadays. Just overall fascination with artificial intelligence is also driving some of these debates. But there are also already applications that are in use, and particularly their intersection with nuclear weapons and various potential risks of using artificial intelligence both in management or in command, control, and communication. Obviously, one of the items that perked attention of both policymakers and researchers as well. And we are very grateful to have today a group of researchers who contributed to a study by the European Leadership Network that specifically looks at the artificial intelligence and its use or plans for use, potential risks in P5, in the nuclear weapon states, and particularly specifically in nuclear command, control, and communication. So we'll hear from Alice Saltini first about the report that was that summarizes these findings and different recommendations, potential points, and then hear from the authors or co-authors of individual country chapters. We'll hear about UK, France, China, and Russia. So bear with us. We'll be switching between those who are here in present in the room and those who are online. We also have somebody screening the online Q&A portion. Please use that Q&A function if you want to submit your questions. I don't know how many questions we will be able to field, but without taking more time, I just quickly introduce our all four speakers today, and then we'll give the floor to them. So Alice Saltini is the research coordinator at the European Leadership Network, ELN, with a particular focus on, in the program of global nuclear security, focusing on the interplay between artificial intelligence and nuclear risks. Prior to that, she spent some time at the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, and I'm very also delighted to, I've learned about it today, literally, that she's also an alumni of the Monterey Institute of International Studies and Center for Non-Proliferation Studies there. I have next to Héloïse Fayet, who is a researcher with the Stockholm Institute, Peace and Research Institute, where she works for China and Asia Security Program. She first joined SIPRI in 2015 and was based in Beijing, that she also studied in Seoul. So kind of a Asia focus here is obviously part of your interest. And she focuses on the regional security issues in East Asia with special focus on North Korea, China, maritime security and cyber security and technology policies as well. Then we will hear from Oleg Shakirov, who's online somewhere for now, who is a researcher focusing on international cyber policy and arms control, and a PhD student at Johns Hopkins University. He has published analysis specifically focused on Russia's foreign and security policy, US-Russia relations, cyber diplomacy issues, and he's a member of Younger Generation Leaders Network of Euro-Atlantic Security. And the final speaker would be Héloïse Fayet, who is a research fellow at the French Institute of International Relations and heads its Nuclear Deterrence and Proliferation Research Program. She is also a member of the Younger Generation Leaders Network. So with that, I'm happy to open the floor and give the microphone to Alice. Please take us away.
Thank you, Elena. I have a couple of slides. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I got a first slide before then. Okay, there you go. So, AI is poised to shape our future by automating many of the tasks that only humans have been able to do so far, and we're just at the beginning of this major transformation. However, along with potentially incredible benefits for society, there are also risks, incredible risks, that stem from the nature of the technology itself and the way it is used. So today, we're here to talk about one of these major risks that stay at the intersection between nuclear decision-making and AI. So, well, thank you very much for having me here. My name is Alice Saltini, and I work as a research coordinator for the European Leadership Network, as Elena said, focusing most of my work on research projects at the intersection of AI and nuclear risks. Now, nuclear weapon states, namely China, France, Russia, the UK, and the US, are currently considering integrating this technology into military platforms that could potentially directly or indirectly affect the nuclear decision-making. Now, while there are many perceived benefits to these integrations, there are also many risks which are associated with critical decision-making. Now, on that note, today I'll be presenting the findings of the report that I authored, which focuses exactly on this topic. Now, this research was conducted as part of a project for the US Department of State, which assessed how nuclear weapon states perceive the integration of AI within nuclear command, control, and communication systems, a so-called NC3. Now, very simply put, when we talk about NC3, we refer to the means through which executive authority over nuclear decisions is exercised and now command and control of nuclear forces are executed. Now, as part of our project, we commissioned 4 bibliographies from China, France, Russia, and the UK to map out those countries' internal conversation on this issue with our colleagues here and on the call will present at the end of my presentation. But basically, these bibliographies were essential for us to identify common ground across the P5 perspectives and to inform our findings and policy recommendations. Now, the report was first presented in Washington, D.C. last November. So this is our second public event that we're hosting on this issue, this time with VCDNP to familiarize policymakers and particularly the European-based diplomatic community on this important topic. But before diving into this issue, I want to make 3 topics up front. So the first point is that while demonstrating incredible capabilities that are advancing by the day, AI is not a panacea and has fundamental problems that are related to the technology itself, ranging from issues with reliability to vulnerabilities to cyber attack, to our inability to align these models to our goals and to understand how AI makes predictions. Second point, the extent of AI capabilities and its limitations and implications are not fully understood. So as this technology continues to be developed, it is possible that these capabilities will, these capabilities are poised to change in the sense that they could potentially solve some of current problems, but potentially even generating a whole new set of ones, which we're just unable to predict at this point in time. Then third point, when AI is intersected in the nuclear domain, Although there are some benefits that can be drawn from a cautious integration with an understanding of the nature of the technology, there is a wide range of risks which depend upon different AI technologies and the area where it is integrated, not only within NC3, but also with the multitude of systems that feed into NC3. So therefore, because of all these variables, the implication of AI integration in high-stakes military platforms are incredibly nuanced and complex. And so as a result, to make sense and some clarity from this complexity, we have developed a set of metrics which allow us to identify high-risk integrations and establish thresholds for integration to ensure that in case of a system failure within NC3 systems are not compromised and that risk of miscalculations are not increased. Now, my presentation will first talk about the technology to understand what we are talking about and what it means to integrate AI within nuclear decision-making. I'll then talk about the risks and benefits that this technology provides, and I'll compare the different perceptions between nuclear weapon states. I'll then conclude my presentation with recommendations for risk reduction, and afterwards the authors of the bibliographies will talk about individual perception from nuclear weapon states. Okay. So to begin with, as I was saying, and to break down the nexus of AI and nuclear decision-making, we need to first understand what AI is. Now, AI is a very diverse field with many approaches, which are incredibly varied and present vastly different characteristics and levels of risks. Today's advanced AI models, which have been at the forefront of public perception lately, differ massively from the type of AI, of rule-based AI, that was already incorporated into NC3 in the past. So today's advanced AI models are, for the most part, based on deep learning, which is practically a technique that is based loosely on how neurons work in the brain, and have demonstrated an incredible ability to generalize across diverse tasks and to continuously improve with higher quality data, with more data set, and with more computational power. This has led to the development of tremendous capabilities. But these capabilities also bring many unresolved problems that by all means hamper their applicability into sensitive domains, and particularly those that affect the nuclear decision-making. Now, there are 4 technological limitations that advanced AI systems have. First one, they are unreliable. So for instance, these models are prone to hallucinations, which means that they confidently produce incorrect outputs that are not supported by their training data. So this could mean anything, ranging from a chatbot making up facts about historical events, to potentially vision models seeing things that are not even there. So if integrated into NC3, this could mean potentially hallucinating an incoming attack. Second, these systems are black box, which means that it is very difficult for us to understand how the underlying process, AI process, lead to a specific output. So, of course, this has profound implications, especially in critical decision-making scenarios where human operators basically have no way to corroborate AI-generated predictions. Third, AI systems are particularly susceptible to cybersecurity threats in ways that traditional systems are not, which basically open up new avenues for hackers to infiltrate and tamper with sensitive military data. So these vulnerabilities obviously provide adversaries and non-state actors with untold opportunities to compromise AI systems, for example, by leading to failures to detect an incoming attack. Fourth and last, as these models develop and become more and more capable, we must ensure that they're aligned to our goals and values, which unfortunately today is still a very big challenge. So now, although these risks that AI brings are widely acknowledged by nuclear weapon states, their desire to gain a strategic advantage over adversaries in a changing geopolitical environment combined with the fears of lagging behind competitors' AI's innovation, might push the states to integrate AI technologies into high-stakes military platforms, potentially resulting in safety compromises. So we must avoid that. But the good news is that although the US, the UK, and France were the only ones to officially commit to maintain human control over nuclear decisions, Russia and China seem to be pointing at the same direction, which means that there doesn't seem to be an interest for nuclear weapon states to integrate AI into core strategic decision-making functions. Now, I'll get back to this point later, but just to put this into perspective, the interest of the states seem to lie on applying AI in certain small, narrow auxiliary functions of NC3 or of systems that feed into NC3. For example, for automating the identification of objects and to detect potential pre-launch activities and for decision support tasks, for example, to evaluate different courses of action. Now, with that being said, my analysis of the risks and benefits stem precisely from this understanding. So let's try to break down and see what are the implications if AI is integrated in even some small narrow functions. So in terms of benefits, some models might be advantageous in some narrow tasks, but I'm going to caveat that, and always with the additional layer of redundancy and human oversight to ensure that in the event of a system failure, the repercussions would not be potentially catastrophic. So to provide an example, AI can quickly synthesize data from diverse sources, including civilian and military sensors, and they can offer quicker threat identification. But again, provided that it is supported by significant checks and redundancies. Now, in the case of advanced AI models, hallucinations generated by deep learning models could even go as far as helping out decision makers or military personnel to test out different tactics and simulations that present unique and unpredictable scenarios. Now, when it comes to the risk, from a broad security perspective, there are risks that arise at the interaction between humans and machines, where AI may reflect the biases of their creators and could lead to scenarios where decision makers or support staff place too much or even too little trust in AI-generated predictions or recommendations. Of course, this bias becomes particularly problematic in the context of nuclear decision-making, where time compression, high level of stress, and high pressures will be fairly common there. So, overall technological limitations of today's systems obviously have an impact even in systems that are not directly tied to NC3, such as, for example, for intelligence collection. And that is because they would relay information to decision makers, which could be incorrect or being tampered with, for example. So potentially leading to escalation under false premises or the inverse. So as you can see, current models present really many high risks, and our ability to mitigate these risks today is inadequate. So there is a lot of ongoing research focused on addressing these technological limitations, especially to ensure that they can operate reliably under adversarial conditions, or to make the systems more explainable, but unfortunately research hasn't made any progress yet. So, as I said before, as the technology matures, it is possible that some of these issues may be overcome, but it is also possible that it will create a new set of issues which we're just unable to predict at this point in time. And so the easiest way to sum it up is there's way too many ifs and whens at this point. So, but apart from the risks and benefits, from a broad security and strategic stability perspective, the integration of AI into specific NC3 functions that are directly or indirectly tied again to NC3 is so much more nuanced. There is really a huge landscape of risk and implication which depend on the attributes of the models that are being considered for integration, on the area of integration, not only within NC3, but again, with a multitude of other systems that feed into it, as well as the level of control and checks on the technology. Okay, so now official sources do not provide many details about how nuclear weapon states envision today's AI models playing into their nuclear programs or NC3 systems. On a general basis, each state approaches integration with nuance that reflect specific doctrines, military cultures, civil-military application, and ethical considerations. It is difficult, though, to have a detailed assessment due to the limited publicly available information on this topic. As you can imagine, most of the existing literature is mostly centered on the US. It lacks in-depth analysis of other nuclear weapon states, particularly from Russia and China. But all the states recognize AI's potential to improve situational awareness, early threat detection, and decision support processes. But they're equally aware of the risk that could skew nuclear decision-making, such as data poisoning and cyber vulnerabilities, potentially leading to unintended escalation and undermining strategic stability. But even though official documents might bypass explicit nuclear mentions, as I said before, open source records hint at a shared understanding that a fully automated nuclear decision-making is a no-go, and that there will always be human control over nuclear decisions. Therefore, although the concept of keeping humans in the loop seems universally acknowledged by nuclear weapon states, each interpretation of this concept varies. So, for example, the US, the UK, and France, as I said, are clear about maintaining human oversight in nuclear decisions, while China and Russia present a bit more opaque stance. But there is an underlying consensus, even among Chinese and Russian experts and military leaders, that AI will not supplant human control and strategic decision-making. Then I'll let other speakers talk about individual nuclear weapon states' perspective by the end of my presentation. So what can be done to mitigate this risk? Well, first of all, states should take advantage of the momentum that the discussion surrounding AI in the military is having. For example, just yesterday, the US held a closed-door conference with some of the states that signed their political declaration on responsible use of AI in the military, which was launched last year, to share best practices with military and civilian delegates of other state signatories. Meanwhile, we're approaching the second year of the Responsible AI in the Military, so-called RE-AIM Summit, where governmental representatives, but also experts from within the industry and academia will gather in Seoul by the end of this year to discuss precisely about this topic. On top of that, the UK AI Safety Summit released the Bletchley Declaration last November, which, among other things, recognized the safety and security risks posed by so-called frontier AI models, and was signed by France, UK, and the US and China, among others. A couple of weeks after the Bletchley Declaration, on the sideline of the Asia-Pacific Economic Forum, President Biden and Xi Jinping bilaterally further reiterated the need to keep on discussing about risks and safety issues associated with AI, and thus setting the basis for future dialogue on this issue. Now, although these events do not necessarily address the nuclear angle of military AI, these are really important developments and initiatives that underscore the necessity of better understanding these issues and to take actions towards risk reduction. Now, with that in mind, for all the reasons that I have explained before, and in line with the Bletchley Declaration's called for a nuanced understanding of risks, my first recommendation is for nuclear weapon states to create a risk assessment strategy. So this strategy should employ metrics to establish thresholds for high-risk integration by assessing how specific AI models' characteristics, which could include all sorts of AI models, could impact the integration area. Now, this recommendation is informed by all these nuanced implications that I stated before. But basically, to put this into perspective, we have already assessed that a current state-of-the-art model that can perform a wide variety of tasks and is highly performing, but at the same time is black box and prone to hallucination, is obviously not fit for integration within strategic decision-making components. This is obvious, and this is not what nuclear weapon states are seeking. But on the other hand, this doesn't mean that a model like that would necessarily be risky if it's integrated for training or wargaming purposes, for example. But then again, on the other hand, this also doesn't mean that a narrow function that is not directly tied to strategic decision-making cannot have high level of risk of integration. So for instance, a black box vision model without verification and redundancy, or with vulnerabilities to hallucinations or cyber attack, provide high level of risk if we integrate it for intelligence collections or in early warning systems, for example. So therefore, a risk assessment framework would allow for the identification of high-risk AI integrations in specific NC3 applications, with the critical threshold being that any failure of AI must never, ever lead to miscalculations and increase the risk of catastrophic outcomes. Now, as for my last recommendations, nuclear weapon states should impose a moratorium on the integration of AI into NC3 until a risk assessment framework is developed and thresholds for its high-risk integrations are established. Now, such a moratorium would offer the chance to review the technology thoroughly, considering its maturity, capabilities, and drawbacks within the nuclear decision-making systems. It would create a space for global dialogue on ethical standards and promoting an inclusive dialogue with other non-governmental actors that are currently developing advanced AI systems, particularly the private sector. While I foresee that there may be some hurdles due to the perceived technological hindrance to technological advancement, the moratorium would in fact ensure progress with minimal security impact, but with maximum societal benefit. And similar to the nuclear testing hold, we need a moratorium on the integration of AI until a risk assessment framework is developed and until we know how to set thresholds for high-risk integrations. And I would leave it at that.
Thank you, Alice. And I understand correctly that you will also cover the UK kind of part of the assessment and the review.
Yes.
And I would we'll hold our questions until later.
Yes.
So why don't you jump into the UK first, and then we'll come to you, Fayet.
Okay, so I'll kickstart with the bibliographies. I was also one of the author for the UK bibliography. So to look into that, basically the UK views AI integration in military systems as a strategic priority and an opportunity to gain an edge over adversaries, but also as a responsibility to do it ethically and responsibly. Now, official documents, particularly from the UK Ministry of Defence, MOD, indicate that the UK is actively applying AI to warfare to predict adversaries' behavior, support decision-making processes, and enhance situational awareness. The MOD underlines the UK ambition to lead in these AI development, and this is due to the fact that benefits generated by the use of AI in this field are potentially so great that as a result, the UK must maintain its leadership in the field in order to exploit AI for military and defense purposes, but without forsaking core democratic values. And to that end, the MOD has placed significant emphasis on the responsible use of AI in the military, and to achieve this goal, the MOD particularly focuses on components such as safety, legality, and ethics as parameters for AI employment in defense. Overall, the UK seems to give a great importance on harnessing this technology, particularly to gain advantages over adversaries, or rather to prevent adversaries to gain a strategic advantage, whereas scholars and experts tend to take a much more cautious approach, underlining the dual nature of AI as simultaneously enhancing but also weakening strategic stability. Now, the challenges associated with AI integration in weapon systems, which primarily stem, also as I said, from the technology itself, have raised significant concerns among British scholars. And so for this reason, the literature emphasizes the crucial role of humans as the ultimate driving force behind decision-making. When it comes to the nuclear forces in particular, official documents do not provide plans for AI integration into NC3, but as I said before, as a result of our study, there seems to be no interest in fully automating functions of strategic decision-making, so with humans always being in control of such decisions. And I would leave it at that.
Thank you, Alice. So we've got a preview of one country's approach, and at least from what could be gleaned from the available literature. And Phase 2 is one of the co-authors of the chapter that focuses on China. So we're looking forward to hear your remarks. Please.
Thank you for inviting me for today's discussion. So the Chinese bibliography is produced by me and my colleague, Dr. Jing Dongyuan. And
people cannot hear you in the back. Please speak up a little bit.
So this is the Chinese bibliography is produced by me and my colleague, Dr. Jing Dongyuan. And I will just quickly jump in to share some of the key findings that's based on the Chinese literature and also dive into the recommendations we made. So first of all, we find that the surge of Chinese literature on AI-related research began in 2017. This coincided with a couple of policies announced by China for accelerating the development of AI, such as the 2017 AI Development Plan, and is just 2 years after the well-known Made in China 2025 initiative. China recognized the important role AI will play in its military modernization, especially as the PLA aims to fight and win intelligentized warfare, a form of warfare that is primarily supported by AI. And in particular, Chinese literature shows a great range of research on the potentialities of an AI-enabled NC3. From the support to decision-making, improvement of early warning system targeting, to the enhancement of autonomous strike capabilities of nuclear weapons. This seems in line with the priorities outlined in China's 2015 defense white paper, where its importance to improve strategic early warning, command and control, missile penetration, and rapid response of its nuclear forces are stressed. On the risks, the discussion in China seems in line with the debates ongoing in the West, as Alicia already outlined there. So really the focus on the accuracy and reliability of the system, the risk of strategic miscalculation due to compressed decision-making time in conflict environments, as well as the general lack of agreed upon norms. There's also one more point has been appeared in the Chinese literature is the security risk caused by technology abuse and proliferation, especially by non-state actors. There's quite a lot of discussion on China's stance on human-machine interaction. And as Alicia already mentioned, there seems at least a positive sign that among the Chinese expert community, there's a consensus that the role of AI should remain supportive in strategic command and control. And even if AI is involved rapidly in the future, humans should be the one who holds authority to make the final decision. And in the Chinese position paper on military use of AI launched in 2021, it does mention and place an emphasis on human control, but without explicitly referring to the application of AI to nuclear weapon systems. But it's not as identical to the commitment made by the US, UK, and France. There may be room for it to be concretized. We're also looking into the suggestions made by the Chinese expert community to how to mitigate risks. And based on the literatures, the importance of the Chinese government to mitigate the risks through both bilateral and multilateral approach are emphasized, such as reaching bilateral or multilateral agreements for prohibiting the use of AI-enabled weapon systems, including autonomous weapons in attacking each other's strategic assets, promoting arms control discussions through multilateral level, such as under the UN framework, and call for the establishment of review mechanisms, accountability mechanisms, and other self-regulating approaches, for example, on AI ethics in tech companies. The Chinese expert community have also suggested that other major players in developing military AI should avoid using AI-enabled weapons, attack critical military targets, including nuclear infrastructures. And I would also like to share 5 recommendations we made to see how China could consider to enhance its practice, or how other state-holding countries engaging with China could try to persuade China to do so. The first is really, when we do the mapping exercise, especially for the Chinese literature, it's become very challenging since there's not a lot of accessible resources. And so there's really some kind of limitation that these messages and the stance may not be correctly captured in the open literatures due to different personal interpretation. So really the first recommendation is that it's crucial for China to engage in conversations, especially at the official level, and to share views on their own strategic intentions to reduce misperception on the messages and stance. And the second recommendation is the need for the P5 to begin serious dialogue, specifically not only the military use of AI in general, but specifically on the topic related to AI's application in NC3. Now, Alicia already mentioned the Biden meeting and this ongoing discussion about maybe joint declaration between US and China on the commitments for human control in the NC3. But it looks like there's a reluctance from the both sides now in the current stance. So our recommendation is maybe by involving more actors in this dialogue, for having a multilateral statement could be another feasible pathway. The third recommendation is to further elaborate a framework outlining acceptable and unacceptable adoption of AI in NC3. There is currently a lack of benchmarks to assess the acceptability of the extent and manner in which AI can be integrated into NC3. And in practice, we have already seen the integration of greater autonomy in such as aerial and underwater unmanned systems, missiles that could be dual use and eligible in the future for nuclear weapon systems. And reportedly, China has also worked on integrating AI-enabled systems for submarines to support and enhance the decision-making capabilities for commanders. It is also important to articulate on what kind of military developments from an adversary that could be perceived by China, potentially for lowering the nuclear threshold. So understanding these boundaries, defining the red line is really crucial for preventing an escalatory scenario. Now, we already see 2 kind of examples that China has trying to articulate some of this stance. One is in the China's 2021 positioning paper on the military use of AI. It has outlined opposition to AI being used to undermine its sovereignty and territorial security. So this may be seen as a red line in China's stance on the use of AI. Another example is the 2022 positioning paper on the strengthening ethical governance of AI, where it expresses opposition to the building of exclusive group and the malicious obstruction of other countries' the technological development. This seems to imply a growing concern over technological and strategic decoupling. And our fourth recommendation is related to the private sectors and industries in China. The risks associated with the military application of AI are not solely limited to the end users who determine the intended purpose and actual deployment. They also begin from the developers who lay the foundations, from the tech companies, and the involvement of other entities such as armed companies. So it's important to include a comprehensive spectrum of actors in discussion for understanding the risks and the implications posed by major use of AI. And finally, our last recommendation is related to the targeted training and education within China. There are increasing programs in China to foster young talents on developing technologies, but what is more important is to emphasize on the ethical considerations and integrate that into the educational program. And similarly, we see there's a lack of understanding on the technical details at the official level. So really, policymakers would also greatly benefit from educational programs, bridging the gap between strategic thinking and technical realities that will help them to make informed decisions regarding AI adoption and regulation. Now, how China regulates and adopts strategies will affect not only how AI is developed within China, but also globally. So we hope this recommendation could indirectly contribute to the encouraging practice and promote responsible use of AI. I will stop here and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Fayet. That was very interesting and fascinating. And the one thing that particularly was clear to me is, like, there is a very poor understanding of some of these issues, obviously at a decision-making level. And that's one of the challenges we're all grappling with. And that's also probably one of the reasons that we at VCDNP started a series of various seminars and webinars and outreach to our audiences here in Vienna, diplomatic missions and international organizations, to focus a little bit more about these technologies, understanding them from the technical side, but also what are the risks or challenges and benefits, but also the governance of these issues. I'm just giving a little bit more time for our technical crew to switch to the online speakers.
So thank again to the Vienna Center for having this event, and for, of course, the ELN to have commissioned the bibliography on the different perspectives on AI. So I'm going to present the French bibliography. Oh, I'm sorry, Oleg. They told me to start. Yeah, so I'm going to briefly present the French bibliography, even though it's accessible online. So if you're more interested in this topic, you can read the bibliography. But yeah, just starting by saying that there is right now in France almost no official publications, and even no publications by think tanks or academics on the specific issue of the interconnection of AI and NC3, or even between AI and nuclear deterrence. When I ask officials why there is no official thinking about it, they say that for them, it's not really a matter of concern now, because the technology is not mature enough to have an impact on NT3 or on nuclear issues, on nuclear related issues. And so they can't really think about what could be the consequences, because they can't really project what they know of AI now to much more, let's say, abstract issues and challenges such as the NC3 and the nuclear deterrence. But in the think tank community, there is, of course, a growing interest that I'm a part of. And the first question, of course, that we are thinking about is basically, is it a good thing or not to introduce more AI in nuclear deterrence and also nuclear non-proliferation, especially for strategic stability. And the main concern that is kind of expressed in official documents and in the think tank community is that for France and other, let's say, Western countries, we all agree, and it has been said already during this webinar, we all agree not to introduce AI in NT3 systems. And so the question, of course, for France is to think about, but what if other countries, what if adversaries and strategic competitors, especially like China and maybe Russia, or also one day, for example, North Korea or Pakistan, do it? So how can we imagine systems from our adversaries that have AI included in it? And basically, so what about this is thinking about what the enemies can do is focused on two areas of nuclear deterrence and NC3. So the first one is about how can NC3 can enhance launch on warning. So basically, will AI in nuclear systems will shorten the time to take a decision? And I don't think we will ever move toward a full, of course, autonomous reply system that have the charge of launching nuclear weapons. But if it shortens the decision time to do a launch and warning, and of course, if the AI models used to train the launch and warning systems are poison or let's say bad models, well, is it bad for strategic stability? So this question is fully open. And the second, I would say, matter of concern about the use of AI related to nuclear deterrence is the increased detection capability, whether it is with satellites. So, for example, we know that with AI, you can analyze much more images and you can increase the precision of satellite images. So, of course, it can be, let's say, good for France to be able to check and to monitor better, I would say, silo fields in China. But at the same time, if China is able to monitor closely the French air bases, for example, or even if some countries are able to enhance their machine learning capacities and find new technology to detect SSBNs at sea, of course, it put in danger the whole balance of nuclear deterrence. So yeah, I would say specifically about NC3 and nuclear deterrence, so two concerns: launch and warning and increased detection. But on a broader scale, and it has been touched upon during this webinar, there is also a concern about blurred decision making. So, for example, one example I use sometimes when I'm asked to talk about nuclear deterrence and AI is that, for example, if there is a deep fake of President Macron saying that the only way of dealing with Russia is to launch a nuclear weapon, a French nuclear weapon on Russia, then what will be the consequences of this deep fake on strategic stability? And also, if our decision makers are relying too much on data that can be, selected by an AI in order to present only what the AI think is the relevant data in order to facilitate the decision making regarding nuclear weapons, well, it's the same. Where does this model come from, and how is it selecting the data? And so the interest in France right now is really to have, let's say, a sovereignty on AI models that can be used in defense. And so last week, Sébastien Lecornu, so the French MOD, launched the ministerial agency at the MOD on AI. So it's in order to have a better visibility, of course, in order to trying to establish some kind of sovereignty around AI, whatever it means, and also, of course, to secure engineers that could be tempted to work in foreign, let's say, companies about AI, and that France really want to keep for the French MOD. And also yesterday, it's very interesting, there was a conference at the School of Atomic Energy by the Navy. So it's a school that trains every officer that is going to work about SSBN or the aircraft carrier. So basically dealing with nuclear energy thanks to its military functions. So yesterday there was a conference, and it was the first one about AI and nuclear safety. So not nuclear deterrence, it was more related on how AI can enhance some detection models, for example, and some risk assessment models and tools for nuclear energy and nuclear reactors. But it's already something. So I really hope that France is going to embrace, let's say, the issue of the nuclear AI nexus, because in the, let's say, conventional domain, I think France is quite okay and updated. We are, of course, lacking money, but there are some studies, and there is really consciousness of the fact that it's really important to think about AI in the conventional domain. But for the nuclear domain, it's still very complicated because, again, the decision makers don't really understand. They don't have concrete example of what it could look like, or they have terrific examples like the movie War Game, or the Terminator AI and stuff like that. So it's up to us to try to think about concrete examples and to warn them both on the advantages and, of course, the dangers of military AI applied to nuclear weapons. And so that's why in my bibliography I had three big recommendations. So first, building a stronger community of researchers, officials, and private sector on the AI, in order to be on the same level that our British, UK, Russian, and Chinese counterparts that are working on this topic. Also, strengthening the links between the public and private sectors, because scientists and industry, they have a lot to bring to the official community, and vice versa. And as it has been already said, supporting a P5 initiative and AI and risk related to NC3. So this webinar is a very good example, but I think it could be brought to a more, let's say, official working level, working level during a P5 meeting, even though the future of the P5 process is another matter to discuss.
Thank you for the organizers, and let me present some highlights of the Russian bibliography. So in short, Russian authors has over the past several years started focusing with much more interest on the issue of AI in the military affairs, and maybe to a lesser degree in the nuclear affairs. There is no formal document that addresses how Russia should and would probably use AI in the military domain, and not to say about nuclear field. There is one interesting document that's called the concept of the activities of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the development and application of weapons systems using artificial intelligence technologies. But this document that was approved in July 2022 was only briefly mentioned by the Foreign Ministry, and it was never published. So it's a non-public document. Other than that, we can look at what Russian experts and Russian defense officials say about this topic to find out some of the important trends in this area. So in general, many Russian experts share the idea that AI will play will take a crucial place in the warfare in the future in nearly all domains. So there is a lot of interest and fascination with this technology. There is a lot of discussion of how it can potentially be used. Of course, most of this is primarily focused on non-nuclear technologies, and many experts, defense experts, but also civilian experts, describe the competition in the field of AI as an ongoing or a potential arms race, and they look at the primary actors in this field, China and the United States. If you look particularly at what's happening, what Russian authors write about AI in the nuclear field, we can see that defense analysts have a lot of interest in talking about the potential uses of AI in all kinds of systems. And understandably, because it's a very sensitive issue, there is less written about nuclear command and control. But there is much more extensive writing about the potential use of AI in all kinds of auxiliary systems. And maybe when I use this term auxiliary systems, I'm not even using it the same way as Alice did. Basically, there is a lot of writing in defense journals, such as Military Thought, about how AI could be used for day-to-day maintenance of nuclear forces, security, and stuff like that. So when we move to more of the core functions, like early warning, when the director of the main center for missile attack warning system, Sergei Suchkov, when he talks about the potential of AI, he says that some of the systems that are used in the early warning system are already automated, but this does not mean that the early warning system will get rid of human in the loop. And there is one interesting example that he gave in his interview in 2023. He described DPRK missile launch in March 2022. And he said that it was a combination of systems that relied on some automation, but also of military units that made the ultimate decision about that launch and that communicated information further on the command chain. So basically, he emphasized the role of keeping humans in the loop. And the same works for the actual command of nuclear forces. Commander of Russian missile forces, strategic missile forces, basically nuclear, the main leg of the nuclear triad in Russia, Sergei Karakayev, he every year on in December he gives an interview about the future and the actual state of strategic missile forces. And he's often asked about the use of AI or automation. I'm not using them interchangeably, but he just gives general responses. And he always also emphasizes that although some systems are being automated and there is much more computers and automation being used, the importance of officers who are using these systems is crucial, and there seems to be no rush to get these people out of the loop. But nonetheless, nearly all authors, they emphasize that because other great powers, including the United States and China, are apparently going to increasingly rely on AI, so they will also need to use more modern systems to provide information to the Russian leadership. There is also a separate or kind of related discussion in the Russian arms control field on whether AI can be incorporated into the arms control framework and to what extent it affects strategic stability. I would say that the views in this community are mixed. So many people do not even acknowledge that AI plays an important role, but this is gradually changing. And among those authors who acknowledge the importance of AI as a technological factor that has some influence on strategic stability, these authors, they attach great importance to this factor. And there is no clear answer of how it could be addressed. But some authors suggest that some systems enabled with AI can be addressed without, so we can basically take AI away and just look at the actual capability without focusing on how it's being on the actual command of that system. So, for example, Alexei Arbatov, he wrote about the Russian Poseidon submarine system, that there is no need to focus too much on whether it's AI enabled or not. It can still be addressed through existing arms control framework. On the other hand, some other authors, they say that there should be at least some discussion between states on whether to exchange information about their doctrines and their views on how they plan to integrate AI into nuclear command and control and into the nuclear field more generally. So the bibliography concludes with some recommendations. I would like to emphasize that these are my recommendations based on my reading of Russian literature, but they somehow reflect some Russian concerns. I would like to highlight just a few of those recommendations. And actually, I would like to make a caveat. I think it's important to acknowledge the political reality that we are in right now. So Russia and the United States have the most sophisticated and advanced arms control framework, but currently there is no hope for any progress in this field. So Russia says that it does not want to look at arms control as a compartmentalized issue, but it rather wants to look at the whole security landscape. And so it doesn't seem like discussions of arms control, and I'm not even mentioning AI in nuclear fields, are going any further right now. But that said, if things are going to change and there is going to be a resumed dialogue, I think one of the first things that states need to focus on is developing a glossary of AI-related terms. I'm not sure whether other authors would agree with me, but it seems like there is a great divergence of terms being used, and there really needs to be this exercise in coming to some mutual understanding of these terms. Second, as Alice has already emphasized, there needs to be a risk mapping exercise as well, something I call fear mapping. So because Russian authors highlight many fears related to the potential use of AI in the nuclear command and control. But it's actually not clear which of those fears are prioritized and which are just kind of concerns. So this fear mapping exercise would be beneficial. Another thing that that other speakers mentioned is that there needs to be closer exchange of opinions with private sector. I'm not sure that this will work on the full scale, but one thing that I think would be beneficial is an exchange of expertise between military field and the private sector on how AI risks are assessed and audited in other fields, because some areas are much more advanced and they can provide better understanding of how you can address problems like interpretability and reliability, etc. And maybe they cannot be directly implemented in the nuclear command and control, but they can be helpful vehicles for how to think about the risks. And one other issue which I think is important for some Russian authors is the impact of conventional AI-enabled weapons on nuclear forces and command and control. So some Russian authors, including from the military, but also civilian authors, they say that we now see increasingly the potential use of AI-enabled drones that can target nuclear forces or elements of command and control infrastructure. So it's not directly the use of AI in the nuclear field, but it's just the growing use of AI by the military in general that can affect strategic stability. And I think this is also something to be discussed. With that, I would like to end and return the floor to Elena. Thank you.
And thank you, Oleg. And thank you, Héloïse. Really interesting presentation. I'm glad it was really worth bringing Oleg back for some of the recommendations and points he put back on the table. And I apologize to everyone here and online for all the technical glitches that we had today, but we have some time left. We lost some time due to some of these challenges, but I'll make a kind of a executive decision here. Since I'm moderating, I'll limit the questions to only in-person participation, and hopefully we can answer them. Either Alice or Faye could handle them without trying to go back and forth between in-person and online. We don't want to lose more time than we already had. And please raise a hand if you have a question. We'll pass a microphone to you. And while you're looking at or collecting your thoughts, I actually asked Mara, who's helping out with the event, to use ChatGPT to produce some questions to our panelists. So ask AI to compose questions for the panel. And I thought that came up with pretty good questions. I'm not going to use all of them, but the first one, what were the most surprising findings or insights that emerged during the research on the intersection of AI and NC3 system from the perspective of the P5 nations? So I'm going to pose that question to you. How do you assess the level of transparency and openness in the available literature regarding each P5 nation's approach? You sort of answer it, but you don't have to repeat it again. I'm just trying to say that it actually did pretty well on the formulation of questions. But one, and that's what several of you in your remarks pointed, and particularly Oleg in his remarks noted it, is that even among professionals and those who are familiar with the issues, we always find difficult to agree on what exactly we mean. Even when we say artificial intelligence, several specialists who work in this area would ask several qualifiers right away, like what kind of artificial intelligence we're talking about, first and foremost, and what do you mean by that? We're talking about large language models, predictable, generative artificial intelligence, and things like that. That's even more the case when we're bringing the discussion the nuclear command, control, and communication system. Not that our P5 nuclear weapon states have already sorted out the terminology in terms of what exactly that means in each of their own cases. But you bring in the artificial intelligence on top, like simply what the concept of maintaining human in the loop means to each of the countries or even specialists that work on it. I would tend to agree with Oleg that probably we won't see much progress in the discussion within the P5. Maybe not this year, but next year China will be taking over the helm of the P5 process. And given that China championed the sometimes criticized a glossary on nuclear terms among the P5 as it was a useful glossary produced, but it's more less than China. It was P5 who were criticized for that being only a tangible result of the P5 meetings. So maybe it's time to focus on something related to the artificial intelligence and nexus with nuclear risks, particularly NC3. So I talked too much, but I posed the two questions, one from ChatGPT and one from myself, both about the most surprising things, and maybe touch a little bit more on transparency of the information, and then about the terminology. Alice, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually going to start first with the terminology because it's something that I think is absolutely needed, and it's actually a very interesting topic. So in my presentation, I talked about the Bletcher Declaration. So the Bletcher Declaration was, it didn't particularly touch on the military applications of AI, but it looked into safety risks that arise at the frontier of AI. And I'm going to quote frontier AI because in the declaration they actually defined what these frontier AIs are. And this is exactly what I actually explained in my presentation. This frontier AI, they all have very different characteristics between themselves, but what do they have in common is that they are based on deep learning. Deep learning techniques are the ones that, for the most part, produce hallucinations, are susceptible to cyber threats, and all the risks that I presented before. So what was really important about the Bloodshed Declaration is that it actually put on paper what some countries in this case, what we're concerned about is actually UK, US, France, and China. They actually put down on paper that they're concerned about risks of these models. So I think that, now also from, the perspective of policymakers and diplomats, it would be particularly interesting and particularly important work to actually follow up on something like that. Also when it comes to NC3 systems. And that's actually also the rationale why, in my report, I'm mostly focused on these advanced AI models, but also because deep learning is really what the new advances of AI are, and this is really what we should be looking at. So building on the Bloodshed Declaration, I think it's something that, for diplomats and policymakers, something that is really important to do. With that being said, the most surprising findings, I don't know how surprising it is, but it's really how nuanced it is, like what it means integrating AI into NC3. A lot of other research that have been conducted so far, they look into, the risks of integration from a broad security perspective, from a broad strategic stability, as I said. But really integrating into specific NC3 functions is so complex and so nuanced that we really have to understand. From one point of view, there can be risks that are potentially cause catastrophic consequences, but on the other hand, they can actually really help out. Again, I used the example of hallucinations helping with wargaming and simulations, for example. So, we cannot generalize in this case, and to understand this is exceptionally complicated. And that's why we really need to understand, how to assess risks. And that's why I thought that, before a risk assessment framework is established, countries should agree to put a moratorium on disintegrations. I agree with the fact that it's, possibly something absolutely not immediate and not easy, absolutely. A good step to go about it before it would be to get all the P5 states, and then again, this resonates from the presentations of the other speakers, is to put them together, bring them to the table, and at least state, that there are problems, there are risks that countries are concerned about, and at the very minimum, getting all of them to agree that integrating AI into core strategic decision-making functions is a bad idea, and specifically this type of AI.
Good. Feisu, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I can also start with the second question, terminology and the glossary issue. I think it's something needed, but in the AI domain, I'm afraid that, like the AI is still evolving, the technology, the advancement of it, the speed of it. Will that make, the concept and the terminology already outdated when you have decided on the list? So that's really one of the challenges I want to put there. Instead of suppressing fundings, I think I found that there's like maybe more kind of like this thinking of integration of AI into the military domain than I expected. But at the same time, a lot of this practice has been more like at the conception level or the early stage of it. So I don't want to exaggerate the implications there. A lot of these developments is hardly we can find the official confirmation from for the sources of this. But I would say like what I mentioned about like AI-enabled decision supporting system in nuclear submarines or missiles, I could see that can be not so surprising if China is doing that. because China is not the only state to seeking this kind of combination between the technologies and weapon systems. And China has been looking a lot, observing a lot what US and Russia has been doing in this domain to make sure that they are not left behind in this field. In terms of transparency issue, I think there's a bit different interpretation about transparency, like in China. Like China sees transparency maybe a weakness that weaken their deterrence, the lack to the ambiguities of this, while the European countries more prefer transparency as a way of arms control. So there's a bit fundamental, like different perspectives on this issue.
Thank you so much. Now, I'm going to give the floor here and to Oleg and to Héloïse. Maybe after we have a few questions here, I may give you a floor for your final remarks, and you can chime in on the questions we discussed here. But in the meantime, Angela, I think the microphone goes to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? It's okay? Okay, then let me say that, first of all, I thought it was excellent presentations and really very, very interesting. Thank you to both of you here and also those two who were on the screen. I think what is really important, and also thank you to VCDNP, my home office, to organize this, because I think this is one of the most important issues that we're really dealing with now. And what I find most important is that it deals with the military aspect. And I remember the nuclear security summits, which you all remember. Now, just about 10 years ago, they did end it. The nuclear security summits, as important, high ranking as they were, they only dealt with the civilian aspects. They didn't touch military. And that meant that you could only talk about 15% of nuclear issues in that remit. You could not talk at all about the military. That was like forbidden, couldn't be touched. So that was interesting. And what I found an interesting comment by Héloïse, for example, where that she said, the technology that she heard from the MOD is not mature enough. And so therefore, it's like basically not mature. I thought that was just totally hogwash. I mean, that's just basically something I would never accept. But I have a couple of other questions. And the first one I want to go back to is to Alice, and that was basically the black box. And I found that a little bit confusing, and maybe you should explain that a little, because the military aspects of this issue are clearly developed by the military. And let me tell you that the militaries have a tremendous problem in getting good enough talent for AI, because there's so much money in AI. It's much more profitable not to work for the government, but to work in private industry. But on the other hand, whatever AI has in terms of, whatever the military has in terms of AI comes from their own technicians, comes from their own tech people. So that means they know what's in the black box because they've developed it. So that's something that I wasn't quite sure that I understand this correctly. And so they would know what algorithms were developed and how they put it up. So that's basically should be transparent for the military. And the other aspect that I found interesting, and I think it's a very good suggestion, is to have the risk mapping. I think that is kind of the start of where we are. But then please remember that technology, AI, is developing so quickly. We don't know what's going to be next month. Think about the last 2-3 years of what we've seen. So that risk mapping is a momentary snapshot of what we have right now. And from that, you followed by saying that we should then have a moratorium on what we don't want. I would slightly reformulate that and said, we don't want a moratorium. We should have a list of things that should not happen. And so that basically, because a moratorium on what should not happen is basically a value judgment. But if you sort of say, no, categorically, this is something that we must outlaw, I would think that that's a better approach. But that's just from my point of view. So because you said what is the most risky? And the risk is a value judgment, basically, in the eyes of the beholder. So that basically does not take into account the future developments. The other thing that I found really important is also the transparency that we have from various countries. And I find it interesting because, obviously it is not very transparent at all. And what I find good about this is that all of the initiative for exploring those issues comes from civil society, academics, think tanks, etc. So I would like to see a lot more pressure on governments also to put on it and sort of say, what actually are you going to do? What actually are you going to tell me? And I don't know whether that's going to be possible in the future or not. But I wanted to say that I really thought that was really, really good presentations, and I know that there's going to be a lot more work on it, and I look forward to other comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, very much. Very good points and good questions too. I'm gonna go back to you, Alice, and Fisu first. And unless I don't see other hands, I think everybody got scared by the technology. And then we will go after you answer, give floor to Oleg and Héloïse, see if it works, to add some of their points, and close the seminar, unfortunately. Please, Alice.
Okay, so on the black box point, okay, so I'll rephrase. So based on deep learning models, all of these models at this point are black box in the sense that we don't understand the processes that lead AI to come up to a particular output. Now, engineers, what they do know, of course, we know the data that we're injecting to AI systems, but we don't know, and this I know, and this is for certain because not even engineers understand at this point, how certain AI models come to a specific prediction and recommendation. Now, there are some research to look into how to make AI explainable. It's called XAI, explainable AI. So there is actually potential, there is a potential way to start to understand how AI come up with a certain prediction or recommendation. But as of today, if we do that, explainable AI has a compromise in performance. So basically decision makers, or in this case, engineers, they're actually faced with two things. Either we have a highly performing AI system, which we don't understand how we come up with certain recommendations, or we have explainable AI, but its performance is not going to be brilliant. So let me put it that way. So I hope this responds to the question. I hope it clarifies a bit. On the risk mapping, so the idea of the risk metrics is actually would work with a whole sort of AI models, not just present models, but for future models as well. Because my idea of the metrics was to look into basically two broad categories. First, we have to look at the technology first. So we need to understand the characteristics of these models and how they can impact into the area of integration. So basically, we look into how transparent a model is, how reliable a model is, and then we can look into other different parameters like how generalizable it is, how scalable it is, and how it performs. That once we assess all of these characteristics, then we have to compare it with the area of integration. So of course, if future models, for instance, in the future will have today they're already generalizable, they perform pretty well, but when they perform well and they're highly scalable and generalizable, as of today, they lack transparency and reliability. Now, if these issues are solved in the future, then we can take these metrics and assess, if these models can be applied to certain NC3 areas of integration. So my idea of this risk metrics, it's very initial. It should be looked into in much more details, but it is already fairly fine-grained with respect to what has been thought of so far. But in any case, after the technological limitation, we should be looking into the area of integration. And so, since what I mentioned is that AI as it stands at this point should be regarded as kind of a failure prone, because it's actually it's highly improbable that a failure will not occur. So we have to look into the area of integration. So in case of a system failure, how would this impact the area of integration? Would it be a low impact, for instance, in training? Could be for systems health monitoring, for example. Could it have, moderate to high impact, which could be early warning systems, or very high impact in strategic decision making? So that's kind of, again, I hope it touches on that a little bit, but just to reiterate, like a risk mapping would actually, if we manage to think about it well, it should be able to encompass future models as well. Lastly, on the moratorium, my idea was just to place a moratorium right now before a risk assessment framework is established, simply because, the technology at this point is risky. If we're talking about specific core NC3 functions, of course, it's very risky. So my idea was just to place a moratorium until we better understand how to map these risks So it was actually prior to the risk assessment, to the establishment of a risk assessment framework.
Thank you, Alice. Fayet?
Maybe just quickly one point in terms of if we can pressure the government to be more transparent in this field. I think if it's related to nuclear domain, it will be very difficult, at least from China. And it's supposed to be secrecy and keep classified. But if you talk about AI in general, I think there's quite a lot of regulation has been put out by Chinese government over the past 2-3 years. So really, I think there should be a mapping and a comparison to look at to the regulations in China, because I think in a lot of contexts, those regulations was not really discussed or has been perceived as irrelevant to the discussion in the West. But I think they do produce some kind of lesson learned how they applied in China that maybe the West can also learn from that. And also, I think one more point I want to make is that to discuss with China, I think sometimes we must understand China has not that experience in arms control and compared to the US and Russia. So really, I think to have more concrete discussion with China, perhaps some kind of technical benchmarks presented already to the Chinese counterparts could produce maybe more process in this context.
Good point. Thank you, Fayet and Alice. Let's try give Oleg and Héloïse if they would like to say a few words to add to that, and then we'll have to close.
Thank you. So I would like to start with something that might sound like a truism, especially in this professional field. But I would like to emphasize that none of these problems that we are looking at are entirely new. So I recently came across the term computer war or computerized war in Russian. And this was actually used by Gorbachev and some of his advisors in mid-80s. He was talking about the increased use of computers in US missile defense. Back then, there were concerns about the strategic defense initiative. But more generally, there was a fear that an error in a computer could launch a nuclear war. And so some of the things that we talk about today about AI are very reminiscent of that debate. So if you look at this not as some novel and exotic technology, but as just further more sophisticated computers, more sophisticated software, it would be useful to put this into perspective. So I think with that, I agree with the point that risk mapping, if we do it right now, it will only give us a snapshot of what people think is relevant now. And that's why I tend to think that we do not need like a ban on moratorium, because it will be very difficult to not to implement, but to verify that it's being implemented. And since major countries are driven by this arms race logic, they think that the other side is secretly doing something, trying to get advantage. And so I don't think that this will hold. But I think that there really needs to be more room for exchange of ideas, exchange of expertise and stuff like that. Another point I would like to highlight, which I mentioned several times in my paper, that Russian authors, especially defense authors, they say that the lack of standards for AI systems is a major constraint for the full-fledged integration of AI into Russian strategic missile forces. And I think this is a good thing. This indicates that there is no rush to deploy AI systems. There is really this very meticulous process to first develop standards, try and test and see what goes, what works, what doesn't work. But this also, again, highlights the need for exchange of expertise. And I think that the issue of transparency can be partially addressed through this closer engagement between states, because sometimes, I mean, historically, we know that sometimes states would be less transparent kind of publicly, but they would be, for the sake of strategic stability, they would be willing to disclose some of the stuff to their opponents, and then they can form shared understandings of problems. And finally, I want to conclude with this point that so we talk a lot about this about technical aspects of this problem, and we can really kind of, if we sit in a room for a few hours, we can design an ideal framework to approach this problem. But we should always keep in mind the political aspect of what's happening, and because even if there is an ideal design, but there is no political will to buy into this design and to provide support, etc. No ideal, no ideal design that is focused just on technology will work. And I already said that there is lack of dialogue between Russia and the United States, Russia and the West more generally, which might continue for some time. But this really needs to be taken into account when we think about how this problem can be addressed, because there is this tendency in the West where like-minded states would get together, they will design something, and then they will kind of make themselves believe that they are already addressing this problem. But the problem is relational, so it does not exist entirely only in the West. It exists in relations between all nuclear powers, and so the only way it can be addressed is jointly. And if we cannot do it right now, we should acknowledge it. We should not kind of ignore or look away, but we should acknowledge that maybe now is not the best time to do it. Or if we want to do it now, we should look for these opportunities how to address not only technological but political problems as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Oleg. Héloïse, if you could maybe try to have your remarks limited to 1 minute or so, that would be great. I know you guys bring really good points to the table, but we really need to focus on ending the webinar. Héloïse?
Yeah, don't worry, I will be very quick. I just want to fully concur with what Oleg said, especially the fact that this problem is not new. I mean, AI is taught in statisticians and mathematician communities since like the 80s, 90s, and all the movies I was referring to are also from the 80s. So the impact of computer science on nuclear deterrence is not new, and there are lessons to be learned from the past. I just wanted to react from one comment from someone in the room about what I said when, I said that the French, let's say, some French officials were not, let's say, interested in nuclear deterrence and AI nexus because they think the technology is not mature enough. So it's because they don't see how AI is already present in all the systems related to military stuff and even nuclear deterrence. So in their mind, they're like, nuclear deterrence, we are very conservative and it will be the last realm that we will introduce AI to. But in fact, they are already using AI for targeting, for simulation process in order to, because France is not doing nuclear tests anymore. So we have a pretty strong simulation program. And so, yeah, AI is already there, but because they don't really see it and they can, let's say, touch it, they think that the technology is not mature yet enough to be concerned with. And it's something broader related to the French strategic community about nuclear deterrence, because as I say, they are really conservative and they don't like to talk about things that could happen because they think that if they talk about it, it's going to happen. Like prophétie autoréalisatrice, as we say in French. So it can be discussed in like very small communities and private fora, but it's still very difficult to write publicly about it. And and so I think if there is kind of P3 or P5 initiative, it will be a good thing because it will help to open the debate about it in the strategic community, both in the government and the think tanks in France. And thank you again for the workshop.
Thank you, Héloïse, and thank you all, Alice, Faisu, Oleg, and Héloïse. I think it's a fascinating subject. You've done a fabulous job both in presenting your findings, collecting them, but also commenting on some of these hard questions that came up. I only wish we had a little bit more time to discuss it and a little bit less technical arrangements here. But I hope you all will join me and thanking the European Leadership Network and our wonderful researchers. Also so, I don't know, rewarding to see young people focused on these issues, particularly women. This is amazing. You guys are rocking. So please continue doing that. We hope we'll hear more research from you and others, but we'll certainly keep an eye at the VCDNP. Once again, apologies to everyone for the technical glitches and going over time, but please join me in thanking our speakers today and authors. Well done.
Thank you.